5 to 6, it's me, Mr. A, back with story time, and we're going to carry on with Tom's Midnight Garden by Philippa Pearce. Right then. At the far side of the meadow, a long grey gooseneck rose from among the grasses, and Tom could see the bird's head turned sideways so that an eye could fix itself upon a gap in the hedge and the movement there. As a matter of fact, the lookout was a gander, although Tom did not know it. A moment later, the white necks of his wives rose round him, watching too. Then the gander strained his neck and breast upwards, and stretched his wings out into a splendid double curve, every pinion apart, and clapped them to and fro. First one goose, then another did the same, saluting the new morning. Tom, made uneasily aware of the passage of time, crept back by the way he had come, back into the garden. He began to make himself familiar with it, its paths and alleys and archways, its bushes and trees. He noted some of its landmarks. At a corner of the lawn, a fir tree towered up above all the other trees in the garden. It was wound about with ivy, through which its boughs stuck out like a child's arms through the wrappings of a shawl. On the high south wall, half covered by the sporting of a vine, there was a sundial. It was surmounted by a stone sun with stone rays, and its chin was buried in curly stone clouds, looking like his father's chin covered with shaving leather, Tom thought. To one side of the sundial, under a honeysuckle archway, was a door. Tom might have tried it, but the sight of the sundial, even without the sun upon it yet, had reminded him again of the passing of time. He hurried. At the greenhouse, he did no more than look through the glass at the plants inside, and at the water tank, where a gleam came and went, perhaps a goldfish waking. The raised cucumber frames by the greenhouse were walked round in less than a minute. He passed hastily along beside the aviary, where fan-tailed pigeons were beginning to pick their way across the brick floor. He crisscrossed the kitchen garden beyond the asparagus beds, fruit trees and strawberry beds and bean poles, and a chicken wire enclosure where raspberry canes and gooseberry bushes and currant bushes lived, sheltered from the attack of birds. Beside the gooseberry wire grew a row of rhubarb. Each clump was covered with the end of an old tub or pot drain pipe with sacking over the top. Between the loose staves of one of the tub ends was something white, a piece of paper. It was folded and addressed in a childish hand, if one could call it an address, to Oberon, King of Fairies. Tom certainly did not want to be mixed up with talk of fairies and that kind of thing, and he moved very quickly away from the rhubarb bed. He came out upon the lawn again. Here were the flower beds, the crescent-shaped corner beds with the hyacinths, among which an early bee was already working. The hyacinths reminded Tom of his Aunt Gwen, but no longer with resentment. She knew nothing, poor thing, and could be blamed for nothing after all. At the verge of the lawn, Tom stopped abruptly. On the grey-green of the dewy grass were two clearly defined patches of darker green, footprints. Feet had walked onto the lawn and stood there. Then they had turned back and walked off again. How long ago? Surely since Tom had entered the garden. I'm sure they weren't here when I came out. Certain. How long had whoever it was stood there, and why? He or she had faced the line of yew trees opposite, and that made Tom feel uneasy. When he had passed behind those trees and seen the flick, flick, flick of the house between them, had someone stood on the lawn watching the flick, flick, flick as he went? Tom looked at the house, letting his eye go from window to window. Had someone drawn out of sight at an upper window? No, he was just imagining things. Tom's nerves were on edge, and he actually jumped when he heard a noise from up the garden. It was the sound of a door opening. He took cover at once, and then worked his way towards the sound. Someone had come through the door in the sundial path, a man with a wheelbarrow. Tom took a moment to realise that this must be a gardener, and that he was doing nothing more sinister than beginning a day's work. He was whistling, and now Tom became aware that for some time the garden had been filling with sounds. The sound of birds, the sound of leaves moving in morning winds, and all the minute living, breathing sounds of trees and bushes and plants and insects. The sun's rays gleamed over all the garden, warming it to life and sucking up the drenching dew. The sundial's iron finger threw a shadow at last, and told the time. Day was beginning, and Tom was afraid of being caught in a daytime not his own. Once again he crossed the lawn, this time with intent to get back into the house and upstairs to bed, if indeed his own room and bed were still there. He could see that the hall of the house was furnished with all the objects he had seen last night. The morning sunshine lit them clearly. They looked forbiddingly real. Fear made him hurry now, yet even so he paused on the threshold of the house and turned back to look at the footprints on the grass. They were still plainly visible, although the warmth of the rising sun was beginning to blur their edges. It did not strike him as odd that his own footsteps, which had crossed the lawn again and again, left no similar trace. He went inside and shut the garden door behind him, and bolted it. He had shut himself into absolute darkness, but he could still hear the ticking of the grandfather clock, and that gave him his bearings. He felt for a bracket to guide himself forward. Unaccountably, he missed finding any bracket. He made for where the barometer should be, found only a blank wall. Then he realised there was an emptiness all around him. The furniture had gone. Only the clock was left. But the clock was always there. Time in, time out. It had been in the hall with the furniture and the rugs and the pictures, and now it was here in the bare hall of the daytime. If the hall were as usual, then everything was as usual, and Tom was safely back in his own time, and his own bed would be waiting for him upstairs. Yet now a lesser fear came to him, with a pang of conscience. The ticking of the grandfather clock reminded him. There was no 13th hour marked on the clock face. He had not that excuse for being out of bed, nor had he been right in thinking this little expedition would take only a few minutes. He dared not think how much time he had spent in the garden. He had gone there before dawn. He had come up just as the sun was up. He went back upstairs into the flat and straight into the kitchen to consult the clock there. It was an ugly little clock, but it always kept perfect time. He found the kitchen matches and struck one, shielding both the sound of the striking and the flame. He had thought it wiser not to click on the electric light, lest even that might waken his uncle and aunt. He held the lighted match to the clock face. The fingers pointed to only a few minutes past midnight. Still only a few minutes past midnight? Tom stared so long that the match burnt down, and he had to drop it. He was bewildered, but one thing he knew now, that he had not broken his promise to his uncle. Tom tiptoed back to bed. He was right to make little noise, for his uncle was still only upon the edge of sleep. Alan Kitson had just finished a one-sided conversation begun a few minutes earlier. If that grandfather clock strikes one in anything like the way it's just struck 12, on and on and on, then I'll just go upstairs and knock Mrs. Bartholomew up and complain. She needn't think I'm frightened of her. Alright. So, that's the end of chapter 5. I'll be back again tomorrow with the start of chapter 6, Through a Door. Alright, take care everybody, have fun, and see you soon. Bye bye.